Hello, I'm Gwen Hill from Pine Ridge Baptist Church Sunday School Department, ladies class, and we are studying the book of Revelation. Today we're in the second chapter. Last week we read that Jesus was going to dictate a letter to 7 different churches in Asia Minor. These 7 churches we feel have been under the watch care of the Apostle John. John, who is the one that is being the scribe for Jesus, and as Jesus dictates these letters, has been like the elder statesman. He is the last living apostle. You can imagine how they looked to him for guidance and looked to him for information. And he was a very loving man, and he cared for these churches. He knew the people in the churches, the leaders in the churches. More than likely had been in every one of these churches that we're going to be discussing. That when Jesus was giving this revelation and letters for him to write, he could have visualized the leaders as he wrote this. Some of these things would have made him so happy to write, and others would have broken his heart. John is in his 90s. He's on the Isle of Patmos. He has been banished there, and Patmos is a penal island, and they mined marble there. Men that were put on this island were not put there for their pleasure. It was a bad place to be. So Jesus dictates this. If you have a red letter Bible and you're in the book of Revelation in chapter 2, and we start in verse 8, this is Jesus as he dictates the letter to John. I'm going to read from 8 through 11, and that's going to be our lesson today. And to the angel of the church of Smyrna write, these things say the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your works, tribulation and poverty, but you are rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. Let's break it down a little bit. And to the angel of the church of Smyrna, we decided in chapter 1 that when he says these letters are for the angels of the church, he's talking about the spiritual leaders of that church, their pastors or their elders, their leaders within that church. He says, give it to them. This is going to be something that would be very treasured coming from the hand of John, a letter that had been dictated by Jesus Christ, and it's addressing 7 churches in Asia Minor. That Ephesus is the first we talked about last week, and it's about 60 miles from Patmos in the Aegean Sea, and then 40 miles or so from Ephesus is Smyrna. Smyrna is the second letter that we're going to discuss. It's the second one dictated by Christ. Let's learn a little bit about Smyrna and the challenges that they may have. Smyrna, at this point in time, is a pretty big city. It's a port city. It's on a lake, really, on a river. Its name, when written in Greek, is the same word for myrrh. And you kind of hear that in the name, Smyrna, myrrh. Some of the places that you're going to hear about myrrh in the Bible, and there's many places in the Bible that talks about myrrh. What is myrrh? Myrrh is very expensive. It's about 5 times more expensive than frankincense. It is harvested in Yemen and Somalia and in Ethiopia. And at a certain time of the year, the bark on these trees break, split, and then it will ooze out a resin. And this resin is a greeny, yellow, brown, depending on circumstances, sticky. In the South, we have pine trees. You know how pine rosin is. Well, similar to that. Sticky, and then it would run down the side of the tree, and it would harden as it air dried. It would harden. This resin would then be chipped off the bark, and it would be sold for various and sundry purposes. Two main things that myrrh was used for was in preservation, for body. The Egyptians used it in their mummy making. It was used to mask the odor of a decaying body. It was used in the recipe that God gave us in Exodus, the 30th chapter, along about 23, I think. The anointing oil that he used for the high priest. It was used in incense, to burn on the incense altar. We found that out. And then in Esther chapter 2, verse 12, we find out that to get Esther ready to meet the king, she took long, lavish baths in myrrh-scented water. In the Song of Solomon, it's mentioned many times. And in Matthew 2:11, the Magi brought, one of the gifts that they brought was myrrh, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We also read in Mark chapter 15, verse 23, that when Jesus was on the cross, they mixed some myrrh with oil, with probably olive oil, and offered to him on the cross. And because it has some dulling of your senses properties, Jesus refused it. And then in John 19:39, Nicodemus brought 75 pounds of myrrh mixed with aloe. And it's mentioned again in Revelations 18. That's a very partial list of where in the Bible it mentions myrrh. Myrrh was quite expensive. Smyrna, one of the reasons why they wanted so much myrrh and why they had so much myrrh, and probably why their name was derived from that, Smyrna was one of the first planned cities in that region. The first city burned down. And so before they built it back, they wanted to build it back by plan. Well, the architects of that time are like the architects of this time. Something that seems so elemental slipped past them. They didn't realize till they were building the city that they had forgot the sewage. So, to give you an example, in early England, in London's history, in early London, the chamber pots were emptied each morning by dashing it out the window. Their streets had a very slight incline where the center was lower than the two sides. Barely noticeable, but it was. And when I emptied my chamber pot out the window, it would go to the center and would travel that way. That was their open sewage line. Well, Smyrna didn't even have that, okay? That was something that was totally neglected. So, as you can imagine, in the heat of the day, the odor that was there, and they would try to mask that. And one of the things that they used to try to mask that was myrrh. And it was amazing. Excuse me just a minute. it was amazing how they managed to accomplish that. I wanted to do a show and tell to my Sunday school class, which I didn't get to because I forgot it, so I'll show it with you. This is a little bottle of myrrh. It says sweet myrrh oil, and I want you to see how thick it is. Did you see that? See how thick? Here it is on my napkin. If I can find the camera. There it is. Okay. When you smell it, it has a very sweet smell to it. If you've had COVID, you probably don't smell that as much. My husband couldn't. But they used it for that. They used it for making perfumes and mixing it with carrier oils and then putting it on their napkins and wearing those to kind of try to do away with the odor that was in the city of Smyrna. But it was used to embalm a lot. And so when you use the word myrrh to a Jew, do you know what they thought of first? They thought of dead bodies. And they thought of malodorous things. It was not a pleasant thing to smell. Myrrh was not. Myrrh has to be crushed because the resin, when it dries, is hard. It's really hard. And you put it in like a mortise and pestle, and it has to be crushed. And then when it crushes, the oils come out, and that's when you get that. So enough of that. Smyrna, when you are talking about, remember each one of these letters can have a literal application. These are real people in a real place during a real time with these real problems. And then you have a historical application, and that's when we now, at this day and age, can look back on the church age, and each one of these churches, in order that Jesus gives them, stands for a church age. Like Ephesus stands for the apostolic age. It started at Pentecost and it ended at 100 AD, which is right around the time that John would have died. Apostolic age. Then you have after that chapters 2 and chapters 3, and that is the age of the churches, or that's the now. And then you have the future church. Remember in verse 19 of chapter 1, he said the things that you have seen, the things that are going on now, and the things that are in the future. And so the things in the future start with chapter 4. So the literal application, then you have the historical application, then you have a practical application. The practical application is when you and I study Revelation, and we look at the good things about that church and the bad things about that church, and we do a self-evaluation. Where am I? Does this church, the good things about this church describe me, or do the ugly things about this church describe me? Is it going to entice you to see the things that you need to correct? Because all 7 types of these churches are alive and well now. The apostolic church, the apostolic age is not here, but the apostolic church, the church that was on fire, the church that once they met Jesus Christ, it was all that they wanted it to do in their life was to share the word about Jesus Christ. We still have that church. We still have that church. Then you have the church of Smyrna. Let's read a little. I'm going to read to you chapter 2, verses 8 through 11. This is about the church Smyrna. And to the angel of the church of Smyrna write, these things says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your works, your tribulation, your poverty, but you are rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Okay, in verse 8, he says, and to the angel of the church of Smyrna, write. Okay, John, get ready. Are you ready to write, John? I'm going to dictate a letter to the city of Smyrna, to the church of Smyrna, and I want it to go to the leader, the elder, the pastor of that church. Okay, let's write. Jesus gives an identifier of himself, a description of himself, just a one-liner in each one of these church letters. In chapter 1, when John was describing Jesus and what he looked like, you'll see elements of that in each of these 7 letters. And in this one, he says, I am the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. In a city with death all around it, don't you know they love to hear about Jesus' resurrection and his life now? These things, says the first and the last. He defined himself as the Alpha and Omega. Alpha beginning, Omega. John wrote the sign Omega, which means the never-ending end. I love that. That meant so much to me, the never-ending end. It's hard for a finite mind to catch that God has no beginning and God has no end. But for me, never-ending end meant a lot to me. I hope it does to you. In verse 9, I know your works. Take heart in this and take warning as well. Jesus is walking among the candlesticks, right? He's walking amongst his church. When you are there worshiping with others, God is right there in your midst. Hearing every song you sing, every prayer you pray, he's reading your heart as you listen to the message and as you read the scriptures. He knows you. He knows you by name. He knows you by heart. He knows you by your spirit. And he says, I know also your poverty. You have to think just a moment about these people and what they had given up to walk with Jesus Christ. They were Jews, a lot of them, most of them were Jews, and they had left Judaism to follow Jesus Christ as their Messiah. Jews, their families that did not believe in Jesus, excommunicated them. They shunned them. They cut them up. They had funerals for them. They didn't exist anymore because they thought they were traitors to Jehovah God, and they wouldn't listen. That sounds bad enough, doesn't it? That's just part of it. There is a political thing going on here too, that Rome and Smyrna was one of the places that promoted it. Remember, it was one of the first planned churches, cities. They wanted to be in tight with Rome, so they wanted to show Rome that they were ultra supportive and ultra loyal. And so they had a oath that they would require, that Caesar was Lord. And these new Christians could not say that. Well, the Jews had gone before the Romans and had got a dispensation because they pleaded their plight, that they believed they were monotheistic, they could not be polytheistic, and they would be a revolt if they tried to get their people just to follow this Roman God. And Rome backed off, and Rome said, okay, said you can worship as you please. You're exempt from this. Well, these Jews who had left to follow Jesus Christ, these people that Jesus is calling the Jews who say they are but aren't, they're a synagogue of Satan. What they actually did was went to the Romans and said, hey, these people are no longer Jews. They need to follow what you're decreeing. They can't be under our umbrella that protects us. You see, they are cannibalistic, and they believe in more gods than one. They believe in something they call the Trinity, and they can't be under our umbrella. So now these Christian Jews had to swear an oath to Caesar and call him Lord and offer just a pinch of incense to him. And when they did that, they got a certificate saying they had done it. Then they could use that certificate, because the people who bought and sold required the certificate to do business with you. You see how these people, when they were excommunicated, they lost their families? And now a lot of them lost their jobs. A lot of them lost their livelihood because they wouldn't or couldn't. They couldn't voice that anybody was Lord except Jesus Christ. And now they were losing their lives for that. They lost everything they had. When he calls them poverty, this is the kind of poverty that you have if you're on the street, if you're homeless. Okay? They had nothing. And Jesus is saying, although you have nothing materially, you're still rich. Remember, you have a material life and you have a spiritual life. And God is saying, which one is more important? This material life that may last a few years, or this spiritual life that's going to last for an eternity? He said, you're not poor, you're actually rich. It's all because of these people who call themselves Jews. You know, Jew means that they are the law follower. They follow God's law. Well, if they'd have followed God's law, they would have recognized who Jesus Christ was. They're not following God's law. So they're not meeting their own definition for Jew. Jesus says in verse 10, don't fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Jesus says, yes, bad things are coming. Worse things are coming. You're going to be suffering a lot. For the devil is about to show you in prison. He's about to shove you into prison, and he's going to test you there. In other words, you're going to be tortured more than likely. And the goal of Satan is to get you to turn from me. And this tribulation is going to last for 10 days. This 10 days is symbolic. It is not 10 calendar days. It is like in the days of Herod the king. See that days there? Or in Genesis when it says in the days of Enoch. That's in the days of his life. In the days of King David. That means the reign of King David. David's reign as on this earth. Days means different things. Commentators are pretty much agreed that these 10 days, are talking about the 10 worst Caesars from this time until the persecution stops with Constantine. There's 10 waves. There's a lot more than 10 emperors, Caesars, okay? But some of those Caesars were only there for a little short while, and they didn't have time to have policies and procedures. At a couple of times, there were multiple Caesars reigning at one time, but there were 10, and they would come in like a wave, and the persecution would be on each one of these waves. So there's 10 between the time that John is writing this down, that Jesus is dictating it, till the time of Constantine when things begin to change. There's 10 waves or 10 days. He said, but be faithful. He's encouraging them in Smyrna. He says, be faithful unto death. There's a great reward for being faithful unto death. I'll give you the gift of a crown of life. We haven't heard much about crowns. There's 5 mentioned in the Bible, and the crown of life was one of them. Can you imagine getting to heaven in God's sight and Jesus placing a crown on your head? I can't envision my God giving me such a thing. I can see me taking off such a thing and giving it back to Him. He deserves it, not me. But He's very encouraging. And did you notice He didn't say a thing in this letter? Hey, you people at Smyrna need to improve right here. I've got this one thing against you. You need to improve. He didn't say that. He didn't have anything negative to say to these people. These people who were in such turmoil and such problems and being tormented at this time. And he says, who has the ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And he gives them a promise. And this promise is to you because it is written to he who has an ear. So is this you in your lifetime? Are you feeling persecuted right now? If you are, this is for you. The message in this is for you. Persevere. Hold on. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. Our pastor loves to say, 1 out of 1 will die. And he is absolutely right. Unless, though, you discount the ones that are going up at the rapture, which I really think it's not going to be too long from now. But anyway, I'm born. One day I will die. I have accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior. I will live again, never to die again. A person who is born and never accepts Jesus Christ, when they die and they resurrect, and Jesus says, depart, for I never knew you, they go into the second death. And you can read about that, the second death, in I think it's chapter 20 or 21. The second death is in 20 or 21 of Revelation. Happen to have lost that little note. But it's there. It's in the second, in 22nd, I think. So take the encouragement that Jesus is giving to us there. It is a beautiful piece of encouragement when he says, he who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death. You're assured eternity with Jesus Christ our Lord. Hope you have a good week. See you next time.